MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter and host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitali, is tracking these hearings for us. Also with us, former acting Navy Secretary Admiral James McPherson, former JAG Corps Captain Margaret Donovan, and editor of The Insider, Michael Weiss, sitting right next to me. Ali, first with you, what have we heard from Secretary Hegseth so far today?
A more muted tone, frankly, Ariel, from him today. Notable given the way that Hegseth has really come here with a more bombastic tone in the past. But I think one of the striking things is that that's just part one of what's set to be a double header here. And it's, of course, against the backdrop of an Iran war that is continuing to drag on. The administration continuing to buck attempts by Iran and mediators to bring that ceasefire to a more permanent position. And that is certainly something that Hegseth was pressed on, because he is here technically to speak about the $1.5 trillion in budget request for the next fiscal year that the Pentagon is asking for. That's an historically large number, certainly something that lawmakers on the House side brought up to him as well. But there's also another request that's been looming, whispered about here for several weeks since the Iran war began, and that's the idea that there could be what we call a supplemental funding request. Basically, they need extra cash to continue funding and replenishing U.S. military stockpiles. And that's something that members from both sides of the aisle asked Hegseth about when he was in front of the House. Just listen to the way that that exchange played out with the ranking member of the Defense Subcommittee this morning, Ken Calvert.
We know that of the munitions issue, and we know of the cost of this conflict. So any idea when we're going to get this supplemental?
We're well aware of all those dynamics. I think, first of all, the munitions issue has been foolishly and unhelpfully overstated. We know exactly what we have. We have plenty of what we need. Whatever we think we need, we will submit.
Lawmakers eager for that request, because in the same way that they have not been given a chance to approve or authorize this war, they will be on the bill for having to approve the funding mechanisms for it amid a backdrop of an affordability crisis and an American public that does not support this incursion, because in large part the administration hasn't talked to them about what they're trying to accomplish here or even tried to sell a skeptical public on it in the first place.
And you have even Republican lawmakers who are expressing some degree of skepticism now. On the Senate side, Senator Susan Collins heads this committee that he's going to be facing. She broke from most of her party and voted to limit Trump's war powers on Iran last month. Here was her reasoning. She said, quote, "Further military action against Iran must have a clear mission, achievable goals, and a defined strategy for bringing the conflict to a close. I voted to end the continuation of these military hostilities at this time until such a case is made." So, Ali, how unusual is it that Hegseth would be facing skepticism, especially from a Republican chair?
I mean, look, in this present version of Washington, it's notable because Republicans have largely fallen in line. I was looking off because Senator Thom Tillis, one of those who sometimes questions the administration, was coming by me here. But as Hegseth heads to the Senate side of this building, yes, we're looking at Senator Susan Collins. She's in a tough re-election race. You're right to point out the ways that she voted in favor of a war powers resolution that failed, but was really meant to be a message to the administration that there is a skepticism bubbling among Republicans who are seeing this conflict stretch past the 60-day mark that an authorization of military force typically delineates. The administration has basically said, well, they're in a ceasefire. It effectively pauses the clock. That's not something that lawmakers are sold on. And I imagine it's something that Collins is going to bring up in front of Hegseth later today. But the other person that I'm watching closely is Senator Mitch McConnell, who has really made it his calling card in these waning years of his time in Congress to support Ukraine and ensure that this administration is funneling aid money there, something that he is going to take them to task over not doing for aid that's been previously approved by Congress but not yet funneled to the Ukrainians.
Ali, always eagle-eyed catching those members of Congress as they walk through the hall. Thank you so much for keeping your eye on them. Michael, you know, President Trump has been skeptical himself about the ceasefire, even yesterday calling it on massive life support. You know, you see the bombast, you see the rhetoric between the U.S. and Iran at this point. We seem to be stuck in this loop. What's the realistic way to get out of this stalemate that we find ourselves in? And how does Hegseth make the case there on Capitol Hill given the skepticism he's facing?
I mean, I don't know that there is. The Iranians are sort of taking joy in keeping Donald Trump on the hook, you know, kind of baiting him along, offering these counter proposals to what the U.S. has demanded, which is essentially capitulation by the Iranians, give up the entirety of their nuclear stockpile, you know, stop funding terrorist proxies, open the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC feels emboldened right now, right? I mean, in their minds, they're winning this conflict simply by lasting. The regime has not collapsed, as was anticipated, and also by essentially forcing the United States into kind of engaging in this pantomime of negotiations. So I don't know. I mean, I talked to Iran experts who are very skeptical that this is going to come to a decisive close. One of the things that I've kind of mulled and put to several national security analysts is what happens if we just find ourselves in a constant state of flux, you know?
Ebb and flow.
Kinetic operations, but we use this kind of grandiose Orwellian language or euphemism, you know, oh, it's a mini war, it's just an excursion, or we're in a ceasefire, even though we're bombing them again. I think that's kind of where we see ourselves heading, you know, in the next several weeks, if not months. And then, of course, you have the midterm elections, and the political calculus might change then. But I think he's got himself into this kind of scenario where it's very difficult to extricate yourself from a war once you've engaged in it, right? And of course, the U.S. taxpayers are floating the bill. I mean, we have the USS Gerald Ford, which I think has been in the longest deployment since Vietnam and counting, right? At some point, these ships and these troops do have to come home or be rotated out.
So it seems as though, Margaret, we're dealing with semantics and plenty of skepticism. Trump said that he may revive Project Freedom to forcibly secure the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. already has this retaliatory naval blockade in place on Iranian ports and coastline in the Strait. That's an act of war under international law. So Hegseth has been making this argument that we're winning, we've won, there's sort of a blip, we're in a ceasefire. But from a military law perspective, are we at war?
Yeah, so a blockade, you're absolutely correct. A blockade is an act of war. It is recognized as an act of war under the DoD Law of War Manual and under customary international law. And so this idea that we can block the ports to another country without being at war, that would be illegal in any peacetime scenario. Now, it is lawful if you are at war. It is a lawfully recognized act of war, act of aggression. But it's totally farcical to say that we're not at war now. And just I want to double down on something Michael just pointed out, which is this sort of on-again, off-again commitment of troops. That is exactly what the War Powers Act is seeking to address when you commit troops to hostilities for long periods of time. So even if we call it a ceasefire for these 2 weeks and then maybe it's not a ceasefire for the next 4 weeks, the point is you are deploying troops and assets to a region and you have to ask Congress for approval. That is the constitutional muscle behind the War Powers Act, the fact that Congress can actually control the budget to fund the forces and the assets that you have committed somewhere. So I think the idea that we are, calling it a ceasefire, even though legally it's not actually a ceasefire, if we're just using that term colloquially, that really doesn't change the calculus under whether or not Congress has the ability to shut this off through their power of the purse and through their ability to basically say no to these funding requests if they want to. And honestly, the hearings that are happening today are probably a safer bet for Congress to flex that muscle. In a war powers resolution, you actually need a supermajority to overcome a possible presidential veto. And that could be why you don't see Republicans sort of forcefully voting on these war power resolutions when they're floated to Congress. But these, passing appropriations, approving the stuff that Secretary Hegseth is asking for, that is bread and butter role of Congress. And so this could be an opportunity for them, if they really do object to the war, to, like I said, flex their muscle.
Yeah, the power of the purse strings here. All of this is about dollars and cents amid this war or conflict, however you're painting it. Admiral, 2 weeks ago, the Pentagon's acting comptroller estimated that the war was going to cost about $25 billion. He updated that figure today. Let's listen.
Outside reporting estimates have indicated that the war costs could be $1 billion a day. Do you have anything to share?
Yeah, thanks for the question, sir. So at the time of testimony in front of the HASC, it was $25 billion. But the Joint Staff team and the Comptroller team are constantly looking at that estimate. And so now we think it's closer to 29. That's because of updated repair and replacement of equipment costs and also just general operational costs to keep people in theater.
There was already a side eye at the $25 billion, but now it's $29 million. Given the added hostilities, munitions used, and missile interceptions since then, is this a realistic figure in your mind?
Well, cost of war is a difficult figure to come about. For what do you include in that? Of course, you would include the munitions that are expended. Do you include the repairs to damage that's done through the hostilities? Was indicated in the last piece that yes, they're including that. Do you include the operating costs of the naval units that are there, the Air Force units, the Army units? Again, those are difficult costs to capture. And what you actually count as cost of war is sometimes very hard to come up with. I would say that $30 billion is probably on the light side, particularly as your guests so far have talked about this being an on-again, off-again sort of operation. We're going to count now, but we're not going to count because there's a ceasefire going on. And I would agree with Margaret. The ceasefire is laughable. There's no ceasefire. So I think it's difficult to capture those costs of war, and whatever has been articulated to date is probably underestimated.